Hello, everyone. This is Kylan Hunt, VP of Business Development at GroGuru. And today I have with me Dr. David Sloan, and we're going to talk a little bit about why GroGuru is focused on putting sensors in the ground this time of year and what it really means to a lot of the growers. So, David, welcome. Appreciate you being here, my friend.
Thanks, Colin.
So, David, one of the things that I noticed this year, and I know you have mentioned this to me multiple times, and it all has to do with us getting ready for planting season. And one of the things that I noticed this year in different parts of eastern Nebraska, realistically, when you got to, Grand Island, Aurora area and east, there were places where we just lost a pretty good amount of yield this year. And a lot of people are accounting that to the fact that we probably were not completely full when we started the season. We didn't have a full profile. And to be quite honest, we didn't know that. That's an abnormal experience for us here in Nebraska. So, David, can you speak into that a little bit? I know we're putting sensors in this time of year, but maybe you can speak into why we're really doing that.
So, Colin, let's go to the data because it tells, picture tells 1,000 words. And here we've got a probe that was installed in northern Texas, but it's actually been in for 5 years now. I'm showing the first 4 years worth of data. But that black line is actually the full point. And so if I was going to jump in my truck and go for a drive, a long drive, I'm going to gas up before I go anywhere. Why? Because I need to start full. And when you think about this, starting full really matters. But we don't know exactly how much moisture it's going to take to get there. And so by being able to watch this trace in the ground, we can see what happens over winter. And in this case, down in Texas, I mean, winter, certainly the last few years have never filled the profile, and generally they don't get wet enough winters to fill it. So you have to start irrigating. But we want to prepare the soil for planting. And why do we do that? Because that water matters, just like gassing up my truck. If I don't, if I'm a couple of gallons short, I'm going to drive a shorter distance. So what that means in terms of water, or converting that into yield, every inch of water that the crop has access to is converted to 7 to 10 bushels per acre of corn. So if I'm starting 3 inches short, I could be 30 bushels down, 25 to 30 bushels off. And that might be what you saw in eastern Nebraska this year. And certainly we've seen that down in Texas. You can see here with this rotation, we've got a corn crop and then a cotton crop and then a corn crop and then a cotton crop. And so the cotton actually takes a lot of water out of the ground. And some people, after the 2022 season, didn't realize the cotton took so much out and they had to put a whole lot back in, and they came up short. And sure enough, the yields were down on what they would normally expect. So you can't go with a rule of thumb. You have to know. And so that's the value of actually um, putting probes out, or having continuous data for a start. But we want to put them out now so we can see what happens over the winter. That's the key time, and we want to get full again. And then, of course,
So,
as we get more and more data, we can be more and more confident on how full the soil can get.
So can I butt in here a little bit, David? Right at the very beginning of your data chart, it doesn't look like in 2019 you were full. Is that right?
No. And so if you think about this coming in just with a seasonal probe, this is also part of the reason why people have got burnout too. Some people have tried sensors and they're getting frustrated because it's like, man, this thing it's not accurate. It's not telling me what I need to know, because you have to learn that. And so in year one, in this situation, we could see it got wet, but then in the later years, it actually got wetter. And so by having it in prior to planting, we can actually see the signatures in the data that allow us to know, how wet is. And so there's no guesswork anymore. It's not just sticking, like, assuming that the soil's wet and running with it. We can actually put a probe out now and see what happens with nature, and did the soil wet up or not. And if I can't irrigate, I'm a dryland farmer, I can actually adjust my planting decision to match what water I have available. So I can, obviously, if I can, control moisture. If I can irrigate, then I want to fill it, the profile. But if I can't, then I can deal the hand I'll play the hand I'm dealt, and still make money out of that rather than making assumptions.
Okay, okay. Let's come back and let's step away from this data for a little bit because you just mentioned something that's really powerful, and that was if I'm a dryland farmer or a rain-fed farmer, you're telling me that I can still use these sensors and make good decisions. How do I do that?
Absolutely. I mean, knowing gives you the confidence to really make profitable decisions. And so, as I said, you have to play the hand you dealt. But if I know what that hand is and I know how to react to it, and I think, hey, I know that I am running 2 inches short or 3 inches short, I can save some money by not planting the seed, not spending the money on fertilizer because I'm expecting a different result. Then if I get some rain, I can come inside dress. I can make other management decisions to try and improve my yield potential now that I've got more
Mm.
moisture available.
Mm. So, David, I'm gonna switch back. I want to go back and look at the data here a second, but to do so, I want to ask you a question. I don't know if this is more opinion based or I'm sure I know it's agronomically based in some level, but there's a lot of places in Nebraska where we have plenty of volume of water, but we're only allowed 7 to 9 inches of allocation. If you were going to have a permanent sensor in there, and if you were unsure of where you were at, or if you were a little bit dry at the beginning of the year, but you're afraid of running out of water throughout the season, when is the best time for a farmer to use that if we were to look at this data?
So if you think about growing a crop like a potted plant, I want to
Yeah.
grow it in as big a pot as I can, right? And so I want to have access that access to moisture, getting those extra inches can be about growing the root system deeper. And so if I can hold off when I start, and I mean, roots only grow into wet soil, so you need some moisture there. But it's assuming the
Yeah.
soil's wet. If I can hold back um, when I actually start to irrigate, then I can drive the roots down. Now, people will tell you, but I don't want to go too dry or I can't catch up. Sure, I get that. But we can still um, by observing what's going on and just making some subtle changes, just delaying irrigation by a day or two. It's not about stressing the crop so that the leaves all roll up. It's about just some subtle changes and working with the crop to understand what it's doing. You can make some massive gains in terms of how it grows and send it the right message, the right signals to grow those roots deeper. And therefore, you can get your extra inches not through irrigation, but just straight out of the soil. So, you know,
So if I only have 9 inches though, and I'm 2 inches short in the profile, my probes are showing a little bit drier. Should I use that 2 inches right up front, or should I wait to use it later?
so that depends on where it's wet in the profile, right? So
Ah, that's an interesting.
if it's dry down deep, that's really hard to wet up. So the water runs through wet soil. So you might actually need to top it up a little bit early to get that deep moisture that you can grow those roots into. But if you've got deep moisture, then you could probably save your irrigation until a little bit later and put it on, when the crop really needs it during pollination.
That
So
deep
it's
moisture though is critical, right?
well, it is if you can get the roots down there. So I think a lot of people miss an opportunity to. Uh, they're just leaving like literally water on the table. They're leaving money behind by not growing the crop in the right way to get all that moisture. I mean, wouldn't that be fantastic if I worked out how to grow my roots instead of 20 inches, I could get them down 40 inches, and suddenly I've got access to all this extra moisture, which is like money, and it also will grow through stress periods. So if I get some hot weather, I got access to that moisture. I've just got a bigger motor, and so
That's
I
interesting.
can do better. So
Well,
if we go,
here a while
sorry.
back, you were showing me some data where this has been a little while back, but you were showing me some data where I think it was actually some dryland acres where they had 50-inch root zone with soybeans.
Mhm.
Is that common in row crops?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when I first came to the US, I was doing some research work, and we had 5 foot probes and they weren't deep enough. We were trying to get corn roots deeper. And, they'll go there if you uh, give them a chance. And so a lot of people actually shoot themselves in the foot by putting too much water on too soon, and they kill the crop with kindness. And because the root
Yeah.
system is shallow, it's wet underneath, so it's really easy to get water and nutrients, like flushing that below the root zone because it's smaller. But once that water hits the wet soil underneath, then it can really just take off, and you end up flushing nitrates into the groundwater.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Well, David, this has been exciting. I know there's a little bit of question on why we put sensors out this time of year, but I think what you're talking about is just preparing for next year, right?
You absolutely need to prepare for next year, and that starts now. And
Yeah.
so you don't
Yeah.
know where the last season finished. I mean, people say, "Okay, I'm done. I can pull my probe out." I'm using soil moisture probes, but I've put my last irrigation on, so hey, no more decisions to
Yeah.
make. But you're
Yeah.
missing out on knowing where you finished. And did
Yeah.
you end up drying the soil right down, or did you get some rain and it's half wet again? And therefore, how much more do you need to go? It's
Yeah.
an unknown, and unless you're looking at it, and unless you're monitoring what happens over the winter, then you just have no idea. And so it's the most valuable information you can get is knowing how wet your soil truly is and how much of that you can access and learning how to access more of it. But it really
Yeah.
does start now, and that's changed the paradigm for us. For me, I mean, it took me a year or two to really understand that value of putting them out straight after harvest is a great time to be installing because you can see, that's where you start preparing for the next crop. I mean, people will go in and they'll strip till and they're thinking about preparing it, the seed bed, the soil conditions, they're putting out banding fertilizer, doing all that. They're preparing their soil, but they're forgetting about preparing the moisture conditions in the soil or understanding
Mhm.
what nature is doing for them. And so that's the critical thing. But you can't just stick a probe out in spring and go, hey, I know what the moisture is. I need to see it wet through. I need to see it, to get those signatures. And that way we can be truly confident. Because when
Mm.
you see water go in, you know it's there. But
Right.
it's you've got to get a little bit of uh, data. So it's a little bit like walking out onto a beach and you don't know where the tide's at. But once you've gone through a couple of tide cycles and you've seen how low it goes and how high it goes, then you can be totally confident that you know where the high water mark is
And it
and
stays
the low water.
consistent. Stays
Yeah,
consistent, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. What about changing between crop? If I'm rotating corn to soybeans, is that going to matter with that?
Um, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you're trying to prepare, for the next crop, as I said, but how the last crop left the soil. So, um, beans, like cotton, are tap rooted, and they've got the potential to take a lot more moisture out at the end of the
Mm.
season. And so, if the soil is drier, then it's a lot further to get back to full again. So, um, that was always the thing in down in Texas and other places, Southwest Kansas. Hey, I love growing cotton because it doesn't use much water. Doesn't
Mm.
use much irrigation, but it uses a lot of water. It's like taking a rental car out. Hey, the gas is free until you have to gas it up to take it back to the airport, and then
Yeah.
so you have to return it full. And that's the same thing with cotton. It might only use 10 inches of irrigation, but the other 10 inches it's taken out of the soil are part of that equation. So
Well, that's an interesting element. It was back in 2013. We were putting just seasonal probes in around Holdridge, Kearney area. I had quite a few probes out at that point in time. One of the things I saw in 2013, which was 1 year after our drought, real hard drought hit in 2012, what I saw is I could put probes into fields that were corn the year before, let's say a field going corn on corn. And yeah, I was a long ways from being full of moisture. I could tell that even with the feel of the dirt in my hand. But what was interesting is when I would put a probe in a field of soybeans that was or a field that was soybeans in 2012, that spring in 2013, the lower profile, I mean, you could just blow the dust out of your hand. It was
well,
so dry.
if you jump back to that data slide I mean, I can show you the difference there. Where if we take another look, as I said, there's corn here. It basically didn't finish very dry at all compared to what happened after cotton. It was twice as dry. And then
Hmm.
you flip over to the 2022 season, and it went drier than that. And so,
Hmm.
and also, where you finished after one season of corn, here we finished after another season of corn. It's kind of equivalent, but every season is different. And the difference here in terms of how far back, it really depended on what happened over the winter. Was it a wet winter or a dry winter? It's nice when nature helps you, but if it's super dry, you you have to do something. And so that's
Yeah.
where those guys in New York, in east up in Nebraska, had trouble this year because it was just a different year. But the climate's changing. The hybrids are changing, and things like nothing's the same. So having a better understanding of what's going on in that root zone is absolutely critical. And so
Yeah.
that unbroken data set is absolutely priceless.
Continuous root zone monitoring. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, David, you've brought up several things here that I think we need to do some follow up on. One of the topics that I might have you get ready to talk about is that deep root. And I've heard this over and over again is, we put a deep root down into the profile, but it doesn't pull up as much water as it does at the top. So there's a lot of people that have kind of just discredited that. Like it doesn't really matter that much. And I think in another one of our videos, we need to talk about the value of the deep root in the most critical times of the season, which up here in Nebraska is typically that August timeframe. And I think there's an element there where we just can't keep up. And I think that deep root makes a difference. Would that be something we could talk about later on in another video?
Absolutely. So yeah,
Yeah.
and you'd be very surprised just because if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. But we want to
Yeah.
move forward. We want to improve. We want to learn how to do better. And so
Yeah.
by having those eyes in the root zone, and by putting the plant in charge, by watching what it's doing rather than saying, "Hey, time to irrigate." And if you watch what the plant needs, and you say, "Hey, the plant's okay; it can keep going. I don't need to irrigate today. Maybe tomorrow, but not today." And so we
Hmm.
just watch and learn. And I guarantee you that will make a difference. And farmers, they'll become better irrigators, better farmers, because you can understand what the plant really needs and react to it.
They become better root zone managers, really.
They do, and it's really not that hard. You
Yeah.
just have to know how to read, how to understand what the crop's telling you, and
Yeah.
that's what we're here for. And the software is there for too.
Yeah, yeah, I think our software is amazing. We'll have to dive into that software here one of these days and take a look at that. But I do want to talk more about that deep root system, how we go about building a deep root system, what some of the nature's laws are around building a deeper root system. So let's talk about that in another video.
Sure,
All
happy to
right,
do so.
cool. Well, thank you very much for listening to us here today. Thank you for David Sloan being a part of this with us. And we're looking forward to continuing to share with you more and more information on what is really happening in the root zone. And we're going to continue to dive in and look at some of the research that David Sloan has done. We're going to look at research that the universities have done, and we're going to dissect some of this information over the next few weeks. And we want to share with you the truth of really what is happening in your root zone and the importance of monitoring that root zone all year around. It's what we've coined continuous root zone monitoring. So I want to thank you for listening to this, and we look forward to serving you more in the near future. God bless. Make it awesome.